Greetings, everyone, and a warm welcome back to Intersections, where our aspiration is to dissolve boundaries so that we can all explore our highest potential. Today, I have back with us a guest that I had the first pleasure of inviting into Intersections 4 years ago, Julian Treasure. Julian is a sound and communication expert, and he's on a mission to help people and organizations listen better and create healthier and more effective sounds. He has founded the Sound Agency, an audio branding company, and created and helped launch MoodSonic, which is a range of biophilic soundscapes to enhance well-being and productivity in workspaces. Julian is an acclaimed keynote speaker and has 5 TED Talks that have been watched more than 150 million times. He's also featured regularly in leading media, including the BBC TV and NBC's Today Show. Julian has authored several books, including Sound Business, How to Be Heard, and now this most recent, Sound Affects, How Sound Shapes Our Lives, Our Well-Being, and Our Planet. Julian, real pleasure to have you here with us. And
thank you, Hitendra. It's wonderful to be back and to talk to you again. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I've been drawn to this reflection on how significant the power of sound is and everything we do in just preparing and thinking about sort of our conversation here today. So thank you for actually just catalyzing that reflection from my side, even before you've come onto the show today. It's already having an impact on me. Tell me one thing, before we go into so much richness that you've uncovered about sound, what has drawn you to this topic early in your life? What has drawn you to the topic of sound? It's one of our 5 senses, and I'm just curious. And also, what makes you feel like now is the moment to actually refresh and update and represent your voice on sound and its significance to the world with Sound Affects, this new book?
Great questions. The answer to the first is, I think some people are auditory primarily, and I am one of those. We have 5 senses. Some people are much more visual. Some people are tactile. My ears are definitely my frontier to the world, my main connection to the world. More than that, and possibly because of that, I became a musician very young. My mother was quite enlightened, I think. She used to bring home, when I was 6, 7, 8 years old, she would bring home and play me records like A Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, or Carnival of the Animals, or Peter and the Wolf. The great classics which were written for children. I remember listening to those avidly. And then, of course, my tastes changed as I became cool, or tried to. I listened to a lot of very different music, but I spent hours and hours in a darkened room with headphones on, really listening to music. And, the albums I bought became great friends, part of my family almost. It's a different way that people relate to music now. I saw an interview recently with the great producer and musician Stephen Wilson. He was saying the young people he meets now, they listen to a track, they don't even care very much who it was by. It's just a song. The idea of listening to an album, almost religiously, turning the record over and then listening to it, listening to the other side, reading the back of the LP, understanding who was on it and how and what else they were on and how they were, oh no, that's the producer of that and so forth. People don't do that so much anymore. It's just a tune. I think that's a bit sad. There's more music released in a single day now than was released in a year back then. So it's very hard to keep up. Nevertheless, that was my grounding. And then I became a musician. I learned to play the drums and played in bands and did that professionally for a while, and then got very broke, as most people do, doing that, unless you're very, very lucky. But if you're a musician, you also have to develop a form of listening which is multi-track and very attentive. Because if you're not listening to all the other players in the band, the group, the orchestra, whatever it is, you're not going to play very well. So there's this multi-track listening, attentive multi-track listening. At the same time, you're doing something very complicated. Normally, you're moving your fingers, your arms, your legs, whatever it might be, in quite complicated ways. And of course, if you're reading music at the same time, you're reading a code. So it's not surprising that musicians, the research now shows, have bigger brains than non-musicians, particularly the corpus callosum, the bit of the brain that connects the 2 hemispheres, because you're using them both doing that. So My advice to anybody listening to this is take up an instrument if you haven't already. It's very good for your brain. It has lots of very, very good benefits for you in your life in terms of processing, problem solving, being able to think creatively fast, and so forth. And this is all research based now, as well as it being a very good social thing if you're in a group, a band, an orchestra. So it may be just a choir, a local choir, a drum circle, a chant group, whatever it might be. It's all very good for you. So that was really, sound has been my major interface with the world since then. And all the way through my career in first magazine publishing and then running my own business, I realized that most brands, most companies weren't listening at all because they weren't concerned with sound. They think about how they look, not how they sound. And that's still true of most companies. So that's when I formed the sound agency 20 years ago, which actually I closed last year. I should have told you, because my mission now, I've moved on from working with companies. That was great for years, but I'm now absolutely passionate about generating listening in the world for individual people. Yeah. And that's where it comes from. Companies aren't very good at sound because they're full of people who aren't listening. So it comes down to listening every time now. Great speaking, my TED Talk, the really successful one, was about speaking, but I also believe that any great speaker has first to be a great listener. Listening to me is the foundation of everything. It places us in space. You can hear what's going on in the room around you. The acoustics tell you, who's there, what's happening, how big the room is. We're always aware of the space around us. It places us in time. Hermann Hesse said, music is time made aesthetically perceptible, which is a lovely way of thinking music. There's no such thing as a photograph in sound. Sound always has time embedded in it. And, I could make a pretty good argument to say that actually the ears are the main way that we perceive the passage of time. You could be sitting with not much changing visually, but if you're listening to a talk, for example, like people are to this, not much is going to change visually, but by remembering what you've heard, you have a sense of how much time has passed. So that's important. And finally, of course, it places us in spirit. There's no tradition I'm aware of, spiritual tradition, that doesn't have somewhere at the heart of it listening, quiet contemplation, whether it's meditation, praying, whatever it may be. So, sound listening is absolutely fundamental, I think, to our existence. And the problem is, the answer to your why now question, we've forgotten how to do it. For 300,000 years, pretty much, of the development of Homo sapiens on this planet, listening, hearing, sound was critical. It was our primary sense. It's our primary warning sense because I can hear what's behind me and I can hear in the dark. You can't see what's behind you. You can't see in the dark, which means hearing is more important for survival than the eyes. And yet, in just the last couple of 100 years since the Industrial Revolution, with the democratization of reading, which wasn't really quite recently, and suddenly electromechanical noise, we've lost contact with that primal, critical relationship, which incidentally was also very important because it places us in nature. We've developed with the sounds of wind, water, and birds around us. Now we spend 93% of our lives indoors. More than half of humanity lives in cities. There are billions of people on this planet who simply don't experience the sounds of nature. So it's not surprising that we're now kind of divorced from it. We tend to see ourselves as separate from nature, not part of it, which was exactly what happened when we were surrounded by those sounds. And you only have to look around now at the political situation in the world to see the effects of forgetting to listen, of losing contact with that. It's shouting, it's shaming, it's conflict, it's being right, making other people wrong, polarization, echo chambers on the internet. All of this stuff, which is getting worse almost by the month, is about not listening. So I would suggest that never have we needed listening more than we do right now in the world, as we're seeing societies fragment and conflict escalate. And I, for one, am quite worried about where this is going and how fast it's going in that direction. So all of that really was what prompted me to leave the sound agency behind and focus on this one mission to generate listening in the world. And that's what this book is all about. I mean, I describe it as a plea to listen in a world that's forgotten how.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Great, stirring commentary and almost a masterclass in finding your purpose, evolving your purpose, and meeting the moment with your purpose. I love the reflections you were doing early on about how some of these music albums were, you called it, your great friends and became part of your family. That idea that there are some of these gifts of creation that we can really assimilate and make our own, and then they have a certain centrality of space and place for us that is as significant as a member of a family. That's so beautiful. I really also much resonate with the concern you have about the explosion of choices available today, the profusion of content that is being generated both in written form and in music and beyond, which is in some ways just just making us so jaded. There was this French Nobel laureate in literature who once said, I forget his name, but he said something like, if I have to judge a man's character, I think not about what books has he read, but what books has he reread. And so this notion of choosing your albums, choosing your music, choosing your songs, and making them really part of your family, is obviously, I think, the message I read in what you're saying is that, like, yes, there's a jungle out there, but don't let it sort of make you become blasé, about this gift of creation that you get from music. But look for the crown jewels in that really work for you. You moved on from that to talk about the significance and primal nature of sound, just as a core part of life, and that's so beautiful. I've always felt that across the five senses, why is it that across all of them, yes, touch and taste and sight and all of that have their place, but sound for some reason tends to have such a significant, deep and profound impact on people, whether it is through speeches, whether it is in conversation, whether it is the profound sounds of nature or in music. So there's got to be something about the native significance of this sense versus the others. So maybe we can explore that a little bit more. You've thoughtfully shared that in the context of, look, at night, it can warn you about danger, and sight cannot. But I think there's more to it, right? And you cited a little bit the connection to spirituality. So tell me a little bit about sort of what you have researched and discovered about the significance of sound in creation as seen across the spiritual traditions of the world.
Well, it's very interesting. First of all, hearing is the first sense we develop in the womb. Before we have ears, we are hearing with our entire body. We still do that now. And, the great percussionist, Dame Evelyn Glennie, who many people listening to this, I'm sure, would have come across, plays in symphony orchestras, is a brilliant musician. She's profoundly deaf. She learned to listen with a very enlightened teacher who taught her as her hearing was fading, who taught her to sense vibrations with all of her body. So we do that now. And in the womb, just maybe 12 weeks after conception, people think it starts. You're very conscious of particularly the sound of your mother's heartbeat, of course, which is 3 time if you think about it. Lub, dub, pause, lub, dub, pause, lub, dub, pause, lub, dub, pause. So that's, I think, why waltz time is always, usually anyway, a happy, comforting time signature to be in, 3/4. So there's that enormously powerful and comforting sound. Everything else is quite deadened in the womb because you're hearing in liquid. We're not very good at that. The ears aren't great at that. But you do learn to recognize your mother's voice, even your mother's language, in the womb. And I think part of the trauma of birth, when you come out, must be this transition from this muffled, comforting soundscape that you've had all of your life with the mother's heartbeat at the heart of it. And suddenly you're out in the open air with high frequency and probably, if it's in a hospital, hissing and people talking and all sorts of absolutely unbelievably different sounds. And the whole profile of sound suddenly is changed. No wonder babies cry, I would say, because that's very shocking. So, sound, just in terms of being the first sense we develop, is primal. And then, of course, babies don't see for weeks and weeks after they're born, but they're hearing. They're hearing. So it becomes the foundational sense in terms of how we're born and how we develop. And then it's, according to a lot of things I've read, it's the last sense to go when we die. So it's there all the time. And it is a remarkable thing, that the sound waves come into your head. They touch you physically. They vibrate this tiny membrane the size of your little fingernail, which decodes everything from a Beethoven symphony to a motorbike going past. And that activates these tiny little bones, which are oscillating thousands of times a second for years and years. It's an incredible piece of engineering that is always working, even, as we said, when you sleep. And you respond far faster to sound than you do to visual input, 20 times faster, actually. Sound lights up huge number of areas of your brain. It's dealt with in a kind of a gestalt way by your brain. It's not one place that decodes sound. First of all, it goes to your very oldest part of your brain, which is asking, is this a threat? So if a car backfires, before you have a chance to process that in your cortex and say, well, that's a car backfiring, I'm okay, your body has already gone into fight-flight response. And that, of course, is happening to us a huge amount in urban settings, because there's a lot of unfamiliar noise or strange or threatening or loud or sudden noise going on around us and putting us into a cortisol, noradrenaline overdose, which is, not good for you in the long term. So that's happening a lot. Then as you process the sound, you've got this entire enormous database of sound, every sound you've ever heard, and your brain is comparing what you hear with what you've heard in the past and then making meaning from it. So I define listening as making meaning from sound. You select certain things to pay attention to, and then you make them mean something. And we all do that differently. So one of the most profound things to understand about listening is that everybody's listening is unique. And it's one of the most common errors I see in the modern world. The assumption most people have, everybody listens like I do. They don't. And really, if we can understand that one thing, it changes everything, because then you suddenly realize you're not speaking to yourself the whole time. You're speaking to different people with different listenings, different upbringings, languages, cultures, values, attitudes, beliefs, intentions, expectations, emotions, all sorts of differences. And it changes over time and from person to person. So what a wonderful world we'd be living in if we became sensitive to that and started speaking appropriately to each listening that we're speaking into. That's a very different way of thinking about listening, and really important. Because, of course, we're now in the mode of invalidating so many people, anybody we disagree with. Most of the internet is full of invalidation now, criticism, blaming, judging, condemning, and so forth. How much more interesting is it to validate people? Hitendra, I don't agree with what you just said, but I totally understand why you would think that. That's a different conversation from you're wrong, that's rubbish, and so forth. So it's another reason why I think we need listening so much. And then, you talked about, I've gone slightly off piece because you were talking about the spirituality of listening, but I mean, when you go back to...
Julian, if you don't mind, let's come back to this thought that you're going to share on spirituality. I want to take a minute just to recognize a few things that you've just shared. So you talked about how sound is almost like the very first sensory experience we have, like in the womb. And then as soon as we come out as well, there's that interaction with the world through sound. There's something really beautiful about the way you did that, because I've recently been reading a book by Danny Meyer, who's an American restaurateur and very, very well known for his, great success in the restaurant business. And then I also did a podcast with Aijin Poo, who is really a very inspirational change maker and social impact leader in the caregiving space. And so it's very interesting because I'm drawing a parallel here between each of them and you. Danny said, he said that, look, the very first experience you have when you're born is, eye contact, a smile, and a hug. And that is hospitality. That is hospitality. And so I've always loved hospitality because it's at the very essence of human nature. And then Ai Jinpu said that the very first experience that you have when you come out of the womb is care. You are in the care of your caregivers. And so caregiving is at the very essence of the human experience from the birth till, of course, ultimately as well when we age and we die. And here you are doing the same thing with sound now. You're saying the very first experience we have, in fact, even before you're born, is sound. The mother's heartbeat, the mother's voice, the mother's language. And it's kind of the last sense that you lose when you die, which, by the way, is something I've heard in many spiritual traditions as well, that a body that is alive but is not showing any signs of animation and engagement, with the eyes closed perhaps and not much movement, may still be hearing. And so one of the things that we are encouraged to do in some of these traditions is to be very mindful about the sound environment. Is it an environment of grief and pain and suffering, or stress, or shouting out for the doctor to make sure that they bring a certain kind of medical equipment to keep this patient alive, or etc.? Is it that kind of a sound, or is it soothing, loving, honoring, connecting, gratitude infused, closing out, this beautiful life? Is it those kinds of sounds? So I love the fact that you highlighted that as well. But I just wanted to point out that parallel, that it almost seems to me that any individual I find who is very deeply steeped in their purpose, which is what I think about you and sound, that they tend to find a way to use their path in life, their vantage point, and connect it to the very essence of life. And that's beautiful, that life has all these pathways which go to the very essence of it. And somehow the universe has conspired to make you find that through the agency of sound.
Yeah, well, very much so, very much so. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from contemplating sound, hearing, listening, and being more connected in that way. For example, I think one of the reasons that we've become so ocular, and there's a question a lot of people ask me, why is our society so ocular? Well, we invented writing, obviously, 5,000 years ago, and that's really taken over from sound. For hundreds of thousands of years, the only way humanity communicated was through sound. It was speaking and listening. It's how we learned, how we communicated, how we connected with one another. Writing has taken over from that, to the point where many young people now are much more comfortable sending texts than they are having a conversation using their voice and their ears, which is, a concern, I think. Also, we have become much more divorced from the ineffable, from the invisible. Sound is invisible, and we become much more about, I don't believe it if I can't see it. Our society is very much about how things look. Architects design the way buildings look. They think hardly at all about how they sound, which is unfortunate because it means we end up with many, many spaces, schools, hospitals, offices, which are not fit for purpose. They're so noisy, you can't really do what you're supposed to do in them. The entire society has become ocular like that. I think if you go back 100,000 years or so to when we were congregating in perhaps caves and spaces like that, they used to congregate in spots. There's a whole science of archaeoacoustics, which is quite interesting. They would congregate in spots where there was a particular resonance or reverberation, because there was chanting, there were communal activities going on, and voices sound a lot better with a bit of reverb on them. Any engineer will tell you that these days. Well, in those days, they found the reverb by going to larger spaces which had it naturally. And you'll find a lot of cave paintings are located in spaces which have got particular resonances or reverberations. So they were sensitive to these things then. And I think if you were chanting in a dark space with all that reverberation, you're dissolving the barriers between the visible, tactile, real world that we're in and the ineffable, invisible, spiritual world. They were much closer to death. They were closer to the unknown, to the spiritual, than in our very secular, visual, tactile, world that we've created now. And I think that's part of the reason we've kind of disconnected from sound. I certainly talk about that in the book and the history of, architecture and how it's affected the way we perceive sound. And of course, all of this is not helped by our education system. We teach children how to read and write. We don't teach them how to speak and listen. How crazy is this? If we taught children how to listen in the first place, how to be brilliant listeners, how much more of their education would they receive? Especially if we taught them how to listen to people you disagree with. I've always loved that quote by Barack Obama when he said, "I will listen to you, especially if we disagree." That's a rarity these days. Most people are now only interested in listening to the people with whom they agree. So that's where we get these echo chambers on the internet, and we get this polarization. We get groups of ever more extreme people reinforcing each other's extreme view. There you are, I knew I was right. Thousands of people agree with me. Yep, but you're not talking to the millions who don't, unfortunately. So I think there are a lot of reasons why we've become divorced from sound. We've lost our listening. And that's really what this book is about. I describe it as a plea to listen in a world that's forgotten how.
Yeah. I wanna come back to the connection to spirituality. Growing up in India, the relationship between sound and connecting with one's spiritual hunger, both individually and collectively as a community, was a key part of my experience in Indian society. What they call bhajans, right, which are essentially chants, devotional singing to the divine that express the ardor, the ardor of your heart, for wanting to feel that connection, that connection with the divine, to transcend, the mechanics of life into this more just beautiful space and place of your relationship with the Heavenly Father or the Divine Mother. I mean, those bhajans have meant, the world to me, in growing up. And I come to the West and I get exposed to more Christian, other, religious sensibilities, and encounter the Gregorian chants and Handel's Messiah and other such forms of devotional music as well. So yeah, I'm aware about how deeply invested spiritual seekers have been in tapping into the medium of sound as a vehicle through which to almost activate a certain transcendental state in them. Can you speak more about that?
Very much so. I think music has been an enormous connector in that way. It's used in all sorts of social rituals, births, deaths, funerals, weddings, I mean, whatever it may be, but also very much, as you said, in the spiritual journey. Whether you're talking about chant in the Eastern traditions or the kind of beautiful devotional music you've just mentioned, right through to, worship songs. There's a huge industry now of Christian worship songs. And all of it can do what you've just said. It can achieve that transcendent moment. But it doesn't have to be religious. Music has been used in cultural settings all over the world. There's not a human society that's ever been discovered that hasn't generated music. To be human is to be musical. The reverse of that's not true, because there are plenty of other lovely animals that make music apart from us, from nightingales to blue whales. And the book certainly talks about those. There's a whole chapter in the book about biophony, the sound of living things on our planet. But we are fundamentally musical. And, I think it's also, there was a big change that happened at some point in human history a few hundred years ago. We kind of invented the idea of musician. Before that, everybody was a musician. And indeed, in a lot of cultures, if you go to them and say, "I don't sing," they'll look at you as if you're crazy. What do you mean you don't sing? Everybody sings. But we've kind of created this divorce where there's musicians and there's audience, and we're in the audience. And so we're not, I was going on about the benefits of being a musician earlier. I mean, it is wonderful to be a musician, and in primal societies, everybody was. You'd have big events where everybody would sing, dance, come together, chant, whatever it would be. It was a huge expression of our connection with each other, whether it's spiritual or simply communal. And there's not a lot of that goes on so much anymore. I mean, I think I wrote in the book that one of the few communal sonic expressions these days is certainly in the UK is football chants, where people come together and they do that. They chant together in thousands, and it makes a feeling of unity and identification and common purpose and so forth. There's not that much of that going on anymore. Folk music is not as big as it once was, although I'm glad to say up here in Orkney, where I live off the north coast of Scotland, it's still very strong. There's not many people up here who don't play a fiddle or a maran or something. However, I think it's another dangerous thing when we lose that connection, where we've we're in the audience not making it. And if we are making it now, music, unfortunately, is starting to be made in a very solitary way and consumed in a very solitary way. So it's made by somebody sitting in their bedroom on a Macintosh and then consumed by somebody sitting in their bedroom wearing headphones. We've lost the social, communal function of music a great deal. And I think that's very sad too.
Yeah. I want to sort of also read something from your book. You talk about how, again, continuing on the theme of sort of spirituality and music, you talk about how various traditions, including, and you mentioned a number of them, Tibetan Buddhist and Inuit and, Persian, Indian, etc., have the universe being spoken, sung, or chanted into existence, or consider sound, often music, as a primal element in the transformation of a very different starting universe into one that could become home to human beings. I want to share a quote with you from someone who has been a huge influence in my truth-seeking journey, and that's Paramahansa Yogananda from India. Absolutely, to the point you make, he, in studying both and expositing both on Hindu traditions in India as well as teachings of Jesus and the Bible more broadly in the West, he talks about how, again, just central in creation, the significance of the sound vibration is. And in India, we call it Om. And so he says, as the roar of the ocean is the composite sound of all its waves, so the cosmic sound of Om is the essence of all differentiated creative vibrations. So it's fascinating to see how across so many cultures, somehow the truth seekers, the mystics, the spiritual seekers have somehow gravitated towards sound as being, in a sense, the first step in the expression of spirit into nature, into creation form.
Well, the interesting thing about that, Hitendra, is that they're right. So cosmologists now, when they're thinking about the very, very early period of the universe, the first few 100,000 years, from the moment that the singularity expanded rapidly to the cooling of the superheated plasma, there was nothing to see. Photons couldn't move; they were bundled. So it was like a white fog, nothing. But what there was going on in there was sound waves, and if those sound waves hadn't existed and created inhomogeneities in the particles that were there, working with dark matter, then we wouldn't have the structure of the universe that we do now. We wouldn't exist. If it had been completely homogeneous with no sound waves, nothing would exist. It was sound waves driving through that plasma, which is a perfectly workable medium for sound, which created, or were very largely instrumental in creating the inhomogeneities, the clumps of rather denser matter, which then worked through gravity over a long, long period of time. And then I think it was 600,000 years, wasn't it? Something like that. The photons unbundled, and we get the cosmic microwave background radiation that we can see 13.8 billion light years from us, which is the limit of our visible universe that we can see. It's a sphere around us, but it's not the whole universe, of course. We don't know how big it is. It might be infinite, or that lady might be right with its turtles all the way down. Who knows what shape it is? Nevertheless, sound was primal in creating the universe as we know it now. And so all of those traditions which talk about the universe being spoken or sung into existence, they were right. And I think that's quite spooky that people actually were able to understand that in some unfathomable way, because they all say the same thing.
So, well, if that's true, then it must be the case that if we have to advance and grow to our full potential, we must become better at being able to sense and tune in to sound in its full range and capacities. And I know you talked about that a little bit, and I want to invite you to share more. I'm going to again, share a quote from Yogananda, which really illustrates this point at a very sort of deep spiritual cosmic level. He says, if the power of your hearing was sufficiently increased, so if the power of your hearing was sufficiently increased, you would hear the magnificent sound that the universe is making as it rolls along through space. It just intrigues me. What does it mean to increase the power of my hearing? First of all, how do I do that? And what is this gift that it might manifest, this magnificent sound of the universe as it rolls through space? With all the research and striving that you've been doing, Julian, I know you've talked about how there are sounds that we don't even hear, sounds that birds hear that might help them in the navigation that we don't hear. You call them ultraphonic, for example. Does that resonate with you, this idea that there is in us a capacity to grow our ability to listen and tune into the sounds of the universe? And if so, what kind of rewards might it yield for us?
Well, yes, in many ways, actually, Hitendra, not with our ears so much, because, we're limited by the physical equipment we've been given. So we hear from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz if we've got great hearing, or in my case, 20 hertz to 12 kilohertz, because I've been hitting cymbals for a long time and I don't have the top end of my hearing anymore. Like many people, 1 in 4 people on our planet has got impaired hearing. And that's getting worse with 1 billion young people joining them, having abused their ears with headphones and putting loud sound into their ears for hours. So not with our ears, but with technology, very much so. Because he's right. Yogananda's right. The universe is alive with sound. So the old slogan from the film Alien: in space, no one can hear you scream. Well, that's true. We can't hear that. But that's not to say the universe isn't full of sound. It is. Sound requires what's called a mean free path to move. So it needs to be able to bounce particles against each other in order to transmit through a medium. Now, in air, that's very easy because there are an incredible number of particles in any given cubic centimeter of air. In the universe, it's not a vacuum. Everybody thinks the universe is a vacuum. No, it's a very dilute plasma. It's the same plasma that was there that had all those sound waves in it. It's just expanded massively and become very dilute. Now, for a human voice, the sound waves are way too short in wavelength to meet particles. So you can't hear anything at our frequencies. But there are plenty of sounds out there with frequencies with wavelengths of light years, very, very, very low frequencies that we can't hear, but they exist and we can detect them and we can pitch shift them up 40 or 50 octaves and then listen to them. So in the book, I talk about some of these sounds. I mean, there's a wonderful sound that Professor Mark Whittle made of the first few 100,000 years of the universe speeded up into about 5 seconds. There are sounds of black holes colliding, which we detect because these events are so unbelievably powerful and massive. They ripple the fabric of space-time itself. They make what are called gravitational waves. Black holes make sound. If there's a gas cloud around, of course, then sound can travel very well through it. We would actually hear it. But even if we can't hear it, these sounds exist and space is alive with them. There's the cataclysmic sounds of supernovae exploding. If you had ears the size of a galaxy, you'd be able to hear this stuff. So this is kind of speaking into the quote you just read. We don't, but we can use technology to extend our hearing down, down, down into these enormously infrasonic ranges of light-year-long wavelengths. And then we can start to decode the universe. Stars sing like bells. Each star has its own note. Pulsars are spinning at thousands of times a second and creating sounds that we can detect. Maybe in the radio frequencies, we have to shift those down. But there is a huge area of astronomy that I talk about in the chapter on cosmophony, the sound of the universe, where it's all about pitch shifting. It's about sonifying these vibrations that we can detect in the universe, and then we can move them into our range of hearing and hear them. So yes, that is possible. And maybe that is what that quote actually was leading to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if sound is so fundamental, then perhaps there is more that humanity can do to tap into it. Besides, like you said, just being limited by our own hearing capacities through the physical ear. And one of the areas that intrigues me a lot that you cited and talked about a little bit in your book, and I wonder if you could share what promise and possibilities the world holds in this area, is around healing, the use of vibration and sound for healing.
Well, a lot of the medicines that we've got now have been derived from ancient herbal remedies, because we've discovered, oh yes, in that leaf that people have been using for thousands of years is this chemical, and we now put it in a pill and people take it. So there's been truth in the ancient wisdom in plants, certainly, and living things around us, that we have distilled and now made scientific, and now it's kind of accepted. I have a strong suspicion the same will be true of sound. There's little research on it yet. There's thousands of years of people using sound to heal, whether it's chant, song, gongs, bells, whatever it might be. There have been people doing that for a long time. We are more than 50% water, and water is an extremely good medium for sound. Sound travels 6 times faster through water and a lot further, which is how whales have been able to, communicate virtually across entire oceans. Well, until we deafened them with all our ships, which we have done now. Sadly, that's also something I talk about in the book. I think given that everything is vibrating, right down to cells. I mean, I talk in the book about cells that are sensitive to sound. That's pretty much all of them. They make sound, and they perceive sound. And there are experiments people have done with sound fostering the growth of cells or inhibiting the growth of cells. Plants respond to sound. For some reason, if you play certain frequencies, the roots of certain plants grow towards the sound. So we don't understand why, but pretty much everything responds to sound. And your cells are vibrating, the atoms within your cells are vibrating, the particles within the atoms are vibrating. And if you go right down to what physicists, a lot of physicists believe are the very, very basic elements of life, the strings which make up the particles, well, they're obviously vibrating. So you could think of yourself as an orchestra, really. And one interesting definition of health would be that orchestra is playing in harmony. And so that's a concept which has been around for a very long time as well. Pythagoras, the ancient Greeks, the idea of harmony, harmonium in the whole cosmos, and the idea that music is pleasing to us because it's a kind of pale reflection of the innate harmony of the universe. Kepler was a big one on that as well. So I think there seems to be something there that we haven't investigated yet in a scientific way, but I am pretty convinced that when we do start doing that, we'll discover that there's been as much truth in the ancient practices as there was in the ancient herbal practices, and that we'll be able to start using sound to foster healing in many more ways. I mean, obviously we use it now for things like breaking up kidney stones, looking at babies. Ultrasound is commonly used for healing, physiotherapy, and all of these kind of things we're using sound for. There's a far, far greater possibility out there, I think, of starting to see health as harmony and illness as disharmony, discord, and teasing the body back into harmony may be a really, really great future for medicine. Who knows? I certainly have a suspicion that's going to be the case.
Well, I really commend you for putting a stake out there and where the future of science might lie. We all know science is a work in progress, and at every stage it's end up sort of improving on the science of the last century. And so there's no reason why the science of tomorrow will not end up discovering certain things that the science of today has yet to form the instrumentation or the methods to do. And meanwhile, those of us who are drawn to those ideas or ideals that lie beyond the reach of today's science, there's no reason to necessarily be confined or limited, by the science. If somehow something pulls you and draws you towards that, and especially if you run experiments and you see the effects of that in a positive way, in your whole life. I've always believed in that. And I love your analogy of how ancient herbs have at times led to medical validation and research today about the healing properties, and have ultimately been part of what pills have been formulated with in modern medicine. So if that's true of herbs, then why could that not be true of certain sound and vibration-based healing practices as well? And it makes sense to me that that will be a pathway of rich discovery and fertile ground for research in the years to come. So again, I'm delighted that you're putting so much care and thought into encouraging humanity to kind of really look at that avenue. Yeah, there's something else that really intrigued me about your book, Julian. I love the way that you're connecting modern science with, again, just ancient traditions as well. And you talk about the days of Pythagoras, and you said to the Pythagoreans, mathematics had four branches. Arithmetic and music both were concerned with quantity, and then geometry and astronomy both concerned with magnitude. That is really beautiful to see, connecting mathematics to music and therefore to sound. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about sort of what you discovered about sort of the way they used to treat and honor, this discipline of sound and music?
Yes, and indeed that four-way split lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was called the quadrivium and still was being taught in medieval times. So it's quite interesting to see music being considered as a form of science there. The connection between mathematics and music is enormously interesting, because as Pythagoras discovered, he had this thing called, or supposedly had this thing called a monochord, which is one string on a piece of wood, which created, it's like a single guitar string. So you pluck it, it's got a note. If you stop it halfway down exactly and pluck it, you get a note that is an octave higher. And then there are numerical relations where if you stop it at various different points, like a third and then 2/3 and so forth, you get consonant or harmonic notes, a fourth, a fifth, the notes that are used in creating music. Virtually all classical music goes the first to the fourth, the first to the fifth, and back again, in some way, shape, or form. And most pop songs will do the same thing. These are very, very common intervals to us, and they are numerical. So there's this enormous resonance between mathematics and music, just as there is between mathematics and, the cosmos. Physicists adore the kind of the beauty of the cosmos and revealing itself through simple and elegant, beautiful equations, whether it's E = mc squared or whatever. Yes, I mean, there's an interview in the book with David Hikes, the supremely talented chant master, he's a master of the Tuvan overtone chanting tradition, and also has studied, Tibetan undertone chanting too. But I did a workshop with him years ago, which was absolutely fascinating. And there's a quote from him about the importance of the harmonic series and number. And these things are enormously related, and you could disappear down a huge rabbit hole here. Number, of course, is related to so many aspects of our life, but very much so with music. I think that's enormously interesting in many ways. I mean, visually, there's a beautiful graphic in the book of the harmonic series of a guitar string, effectively, which is just absolutely beautiful. So you can express this visually and you get something beautiful. The harmonic series itself resonates with us. There aren't many musical traditions on the planet that still have the pure harmonic series, because we invented the well-tempered keyboard a couple of hundred years ago, or a bit more than that now, which is not quite true to the harmonic series. And, there are a lot of people who also get upset about Concert A being tuned at 440 hertz instead of, I think it's 432, isn't it? The harmonic series version. Personally, I have to say I can't tell the difference between music that's made in the old way and music that's made in the well-tempered way, or at least I don't feel the difference. But I know there are people who claim they do feel a difference. There is just so much to inquire into when you start to lift the lid on all aspects of sound, whether it's the sound of living things and our relationship with them, or the sound of the whole topic of music and the theory of music, the relationship of music to humanity, to spirituality, to mathematics. The level of inquiry is enormous. And all of this really comes back to the fundamental thesis of the book, which is sound is wonderful, amazing, magnificent, extraordinary, primal. Why have we lost contact with it? It's so sad that we've moved away from it. We've become deaf. Our ears have gone numb. We're not listening to the world around us, particularly living things. We spend 93% of our lives indoors now. We're hermetically sealed. We invented glass and windows, and we've sealed ourselves off from the outside. More than 50% of humanity live in cities now. And a lot of those cities, particularly in the East, and you probably would remember this from your childhood, they're very, very noisy places. Some of them are frighteningly noisy. I mean, literally deafening. Where there's a couple of cities. I can't remember I have a table in the book of the noisiest cities in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dhaka is the number one. But you're talking about average noise levels of well over 100 decibels. That is literally deafening.
Yeah.
And living in a place like that, you're not going to hear wind, water, and birds. You're not going to hear these health-giving sounds that have nurtured us for thousands and thousands of years. They're gone. More than half of humanity are divorced from them. This is a great concern to me, because, this connection with nature, which comes through our ears largely, helps us to be part of nature, not above it, not separate from it, but part of it. And I think that disconnection has got a lot to do with the way that we're treating the world now, and the terrible, devastating effect we're having on it with our noise, quite apart from anything else.
Yeah. You mentioned in your book the impact that sound has on us on multiple levels, right? Physiologically, psychologically, cognitively, and then behaviorally. And I think you're so right. We have completely undervalued in our civic planning and all of that. I mean, the import of sort of what is the ambiance we are creating from a sound standpoint in all these spaces. So that way, I'm hoping that while you have closed your studio that was doing consulting to businesses about sort of being thoughtful about the ambience, about the sound, that work in biophonics might be available and accessible to people if they were interested in wanting to sort of learn how to create those kinds of more natural sounds in their spaces, whether it's at home or in community spaces.
Yeah, very much so. Well, I did help with the launch of Mood Sonic, which is out there doing really good work in workspaces. So that's for corporates, and that's biophilic sound that's generative. So it's not recorded; it's created live by computer. So there's no loops. People don't like loops. You get frustrated if you spot a loop; it becomes irritating. So that's happening, and I'm very glad that they're doing such good work there. And for individuals, I recommend in the book also a wonderful website run by a good man called Stéphane Pigeon. It's called mynoise.net, and it's full of some really beautifully sampled nature sound that you can create your own soundscapes from, and you can make them move and change as well. So that's a great resource if you're at home and you want something that's inexpensive and available on the internet. And of course, if you go onto YouTube, there's infinite numbers of videos of hours of recording of water or birds or all sorts of lovely things that you can put on in the background. So it's very easy now to access nature sound. And the good news is that recorded nature sound is better than nothing. It's good for you. Not quite as good as the real thing, because then you're surrounded by other senses feeding in, and you've got there's a thing called cross modality, the senses affecting one another. So you have a thing called super additivity, when you align all the senses and you have similar messages in all of them.
Right.
Nevertheless, it's better to have nature sound around you in your home than not to have it at all, even recorded. So that's important.
All right. Wonderful. Well, let's maybe end with the most important sound of all, as you highlight, which is silence. What is the significance of silence in our lives?
Yes, again, a sound that we are losing contact with. There's not a great deal of silence in cities. So you're talking about a huge number of billions and billions of people who probably don't experience silence at all. And silence is the baseline, it's what creates meaning because it's the gaps between the words, it's the gaps between the notes that give meaning. You have to have the valleys to have the peaks. And without the valleys, without the gaps, everything becomes cacophony and meaningless. So silence is very important from that point of view. And also, of course, because silence resets and recalibrates. Recording engineers will have to take breaks every hour or two to reset their ears, because otherwise you just go deaf. You can't tell the difference anymore. Your ears become tired. And that, again, is something which is probably very familiar to most people who live in cities where you're surrounded by noise the whole time. And if it's noisy all the time, you start to lose your discernment, your ability to listen to the small, quiet, important things, which that's sad too. So silence is necessary for recalibration, for refreshment, for rest and peace. Some people I know find silence threatening now. They live in a city, and if they go and stay with a friend in the country, it's so quiet, it's spooky. Whereas, of course, the country person goes to the city and goes, it's so noisy, how can you sleep? So habituation has a big part of this. And I don't think it's good for us to habituate to constant din in a city. This is not how we evolved. This is not the environment our systems are designed to deal with. We're designed to live in a much quieter world than we have created. So health-wise, we have to be careful. And seeking out silence, I mean, I say this in the book, and I've said it in TED Talks in the past, I do recommend for everybody to seek out silence, even just a few minutes a day. And if that means you have to go into, a bathroom, a closet, wherever it is, just give yourself that little gift. And then, of course, you can start to explore the different qualities of silence. There are lots of very different silences. And the silence of being up in a mountain above the tree line with no birds, no wind, a vast, expansive silence, compared to the silence deep in a cave, which is cloying and enveloping and oppressive silence. So the silence of an argument, the silence of love. There are so many different silences. Silence can mean so many different things. It's a wonderful sound to explore. And I do reproduce in the book a lovely walk of silence, which is on the island of San Giuliano in Lake Orta in Italy, northern Italy. It's a convent, and there's a walk around the convent called the Walk of Silence that you are supposed to do in silence. And every 100 meters or so, there's a sign with a reflection for you to meditate on as you walk the next part. And I took photographs of them as I was doing that. I've reproduced them in the book. And I think it's a wonderful thing to do. Just spend a minute or two on each of those reflections, and they really help to center you. I think, again, Dame Evelyn Glennie said silence is a sound. And it's one of the most important sounds, and one which, again, we're losing contact with. Shinrin-yoku, I'm very glad to say, is becoming more and more popular. Forest bathing, an idea which has been around for a long time, taking a nice walk in a forest or any nature place, but it got kind of rebranded in Japan as Shinrin-yoku and is now coming to all sorts of countries. There are Shinrin-yoku centers in the US, the UK, all over the place. So again, that's something people can seek out, where people go for a walk in nature, in forests, don't say anything, and just listen and connect again with nature, which is something we so need to do.
Oh, yeah. Incredible, incredible, beautiful, an inspired commentary, Julian. In that convent, when you said there were these reflections every few steps, can you give one example of those?
Yes. In the silence, you meet the master. That's one I remember. In the silence, you meet yourself. And that may be why some people find silence quite threatening, because, a lot of our modern civilization is about distraction and not meeting ourselves, doing
Yeah.
stuff, being busy, being distracted, having lots of inputs going on at the same time. This is all about keeping ourselves away from ourselves. And, it's important to do that. And as you well know, Hitendra, so many of the great spiritual traditions, particularly in the East, are exactly about that. They're exactly about going inside, meeting yourself, and coming to, some sort of compassionate reconciliation with yourself, acceptance, compassion, gratitude, all of
Yeah.
those things, as opposed to running away from yourself and being permanently distracted and thinking happiness is over there, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
so endemic in the Western civilization now. Of course, happiness is never over there. It's
Mm-hmm.
only ever here, now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that, again, we can get more back in contact with if we explore silence.
Mm-hmm. In silence, you meet the master. In silence, you meet yourself. I love that. I love that. It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from Yogananda. He said, "It is when you become silent that God breaks his silence." For our secular communities, like my students at Columbia, without necessarily inviting them into a deeper spiritual quest, I've just kind of modified that to use the word inner voice instead of God. So I said, it's when you become silent that your inner voice breaks its silence. So it's so beautiful that you talked about the convent, talking about you meet your master, you meet yourself. It's kind of like very much the same ideas. These are such universal truths. Such
Yes,
universal
I think
truths.
the inner voice speaks very quietly wherever it comes from. It's a quiet voice, and you do have to be quiet to hear it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, there is another significance in a more practical way of the power of silence, and you mention it in such an articulate way. You say a skilled actor or orator is best friends with silence, using it for emphasis, shock, variation, and to amplify meaning.
One
So
of the
that's
most common
deep. Yeah.
mistakes that I see people making when they're giving public speaking is gabbling, is filling every second with sound, which may come out as ers, ahs, ums, and all the rest of it, or just constant verbiage. And I've done a thing for years when I give my keynotes about speaking, which I've done that for a long time, and it's interesting to reflect that my TED talk on speaking has been seen by 5 times as many people as my TED talk on listening. Um, so, but I've talked even in the talk about speaking, I talk very much about silence, and I can be standing on a stage in front of 1,000 people and just stop. Now, I won't do it for long now because that's called dead air when you're on on a medium
Yeah.
like this, and people get uncomfortable. But it's standing on a stage, I can stop for 30 seconds, even a minute, and I'm just looking perfectly comfortable, and they're all going, "Ah, that's nice. You stopped. What shall I have for lunch?" And it's all fine as long as I'm not looking flustered and there's no visual cue that something's wrong. People are
Yeah.
perfectly happy with that. I mean, there's a limit to how far you can push it. But
Yeah.
becoming comfortable with that silence is really important as a speaker because, as I said, as you just quoted in the book, it's using silence for impact, letting things settle like that. Just a second or two makes such a difference. Not having to be speaking the whole time, filling every gap. Very important. So, yes, silence is the base for everything. And becoming friends with silence, becoming comfortable with silence can make you a much more powerful speaker, as well, of course, as a much, much better listener.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I found in teaching is that it's one thing if you're just having an intellectual exchange, something at the analytical level, just the mental sort of passing back and forth of thoughts and ideas. But when you get into, for example, like the emotional space, and somebody sharing a personal journey, a story, a struggle, certain, a certain moment where things really tugged at the heartstrings, and if, as the instructor, you just again quickly respond at an intellectual level as opposed to just pausing and creating a little bit of space for the processing and honoring of that emotion, that has just been laid out there, bare in the room, and everybody feels a sense of connection, perhaps commiseration, empathy, appreciation, whatever it might be, that is so important to, again, just affirm something through silence that words would never have been able to, do equal justice to.
I think I say this in the book, that true listening is very close to meditation, because you have to be empty and not composing your next bit of dialogue. So, the opposite of what you just said would be somebody shares something significant and you come straight in with a fix or, an observation, an opinion, whatever it may be. You've probably been preparing that as they were speaking.
Yeah.
And that's not the best way to listen. Listening is being empty. And there's also a humility in listening, which is very, very important. Listening is a very humble experience. You are giving somebody else your full attention, and thereby you're making them as important as you by doing that. It's a great gift to give people, which doesn't get given that often in our very busy civilization. We're normally looking at something in our hand. Yeah, I'm listening to you. No, you're sending a text. That's different. Mm-hmm. That's partial listening. I'm not saying it's bad, but the key thing is to be conscious of the way you're listening. And sometimes it is important to put everything down and give somebody your full attention. And in that humility, in that place of emptiness and humility, let them fill you and trust that your mouth is going to know what to do when it comes to your turn, as opposed to be creating your next brilliant piece of monologue, which is a form of listening I call speech writing. It's not really listening.
Yeah. So beautiful, so beautiful. So tell us, as we begin to close our discussion out, what this movement is, this community is that you're focused on building now around the art and science of sound and listening.
Well, the book took 2 years to come to fruition, and now it's done, and I'm involved in the pre-launch stuff of the book. It's all very exciting. But while I was gestating the book, and particularly towards the end of it, I was thinking, what now? Getting the book out there is wonderful because my mission is to generate listening in the world. But what now? And I thought there isn't really a place. I mean, there are certain things out there in the world. There's the International Listening Association, who were very kind enough to give me an award a few years ago. Lovely organization, very academic. It's full of professors and people who are academically engaged in the whole concept of listening and write papers about it and so forth. There's nothing there for the average person. Evelyn Glennie has got a wonderful community which does fantastic social programs to help children listen and so forth. I was looking at where's a place people can go and hang out with people who are fascinated by, engaged in listening, want to listen better, or engaged in sound and really interested in sound. So I'm creating an online community called the Listening Society, which will be opening its doors on May the 1st. And so I'm very busy right now setting it up, populating it with all the content I can to start it off with, which will be a lot. Nevertheless, what it's going to take off as, I hope, is as people come into the community and start to express themselves and contribute, it will become this unbelievable resource where if you're interested in sound, whether you're, professional with it, a musician, a sound engineer, an acoustician, or whether you're interested in listening, you're a parent, you're a professional who wants to sell better, whatever it may be, somebody who's concerned about ecology, about our effect on the planet with noise, all sorts of different people will be able to come in there, hang out, ask questions, put their problems in there, have somebody who's similar to them solve them, suggest things, bring gifts for other people. I'm so excited about it. And this to me is going to be legacy. I'm not obsessed with legacy, but I really wanted to do something which is going to outlast me and foster listening in the world and become, a force on its own, really. I can start it, but I hope this is going to grow and grow. So that's what we're doing to make the book kind of last in the world, if you like. And I'm very excited about it.
Thank you for sharing. I'm thrilled to hear that there is a practical way in which folks who are really invested and interested in this can access and tap into some of these beautiful structures and practices you've created and be part of a community that can engage them in that. You to me are a shining example of something that I've, over time understood about life, which is that, there's this, infinite, creative genius in spirit, and then it takes these forms in nature which ultimately are finite, but then each of them is therefore meant to be very unique and distinctive, and you are one of those forms, Julian, and the form you've taken is one that really takes this dimension of nature and really honors it and brings it to the center of our consciousness. And that's such a beautiful gift to give us, and purpose to have in life. And it is very clear that, yeah, you're in harmony, that you're coming to it from a place where every part of sort of what you're doing and every ounce of energy that you're expending is all in service of. And of course, just as sound evolves in the universe, your gifts evolve, your vision evolves, you're being in tune with the moment, and being of maximal service as you can through this agency evolves, and so that's really beautiful. It's really beautiful. I want to sort of allow you to bring us to closure with sharing a little bit about sort of what's your wish, for our humanity in the years ahead. What's your wish for that? And before you do that, I'll share a quote with you, that I picked out as I was preparing for our conversation today, from W.B. Yeats, the poet and writer, and he said, "The world is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper." Right. And that's what you've shown us today, that, my heavens, I'm in this dimension of sound. There are magical possibilities, and who knows what our lives could become in terms of happiness and health and harmony and, high performance in our communications if we were able to just, make our senses just a little bit sharper. So thank you for that. And back to you to tell us kind of what you're really hoping for humanity to evolve into and arrive at in the years ahead.
Well, yes, I think evolve is a bit concerning, because as I look around at the world right now, I'm very, very worried that our lack of listening is driving so much conflict. You just look at the politics that we've got around us, the degree of polarization, shouting, judgment, condemning, that the conflict that's going on is escalating almost month by month. And that's a slippery slope. So I do think that if we care about democracy, if we care about civil society, that it's really crucial that we rediscover our listening faster than evolving it. And if you gave me one wish, it would be that we would start teaching our children to listen tomorrow in school. Because if we were to put a whole generation of children out in 10 years' time who have been taught to listen, and particularly to listen to people they don't agree with, and how to synthesize that, and how to validate people without conflict, and how to accept and understand difference, what a different world we'd be living in. And it could happen almost overnight. But that's what it comes down to. I hope it's not going to be at the speed of evolution. I hope it's going to be much faster than that, and that, within a few years, we'll be teaching children how to listen and the importance of listening and taking it seriously. And if this book and if the community I'm putting together make a tiny dent in that, I'll be very happy. If we can move the mountain just a few inches, that'll be great. We do need to start, though, because time is short. And I do worry for the world we'll be in 10 or 20 years if we stay on this slippery slope that we're on right now. So let's get listening.
Yeah. Well, I love the way you're translating a worry, a concern, a fear, a disenchantment with certain aspects of the polarized world today, and translating that into a very positive purpose, both for yourself and for what you want to manifest in the world. And that is my wish for all of our listeners as well, that you find, your version of what is sound to you, or what is that purpose to you, just like Julian is so beautifully, exemplifying for us this capacity in all of us to tap into some aspect of life in nature and make it our own, and then bring it out into the world to have such positive and beautiful impact. Thank you for all you're doing. All the best with the launch, and we much look forward to seeing the many ripples that you will create in the lake of life.
Thank you, Hitendra. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.